The group backing an Ohio ballot measure that would enshrine the right to an abortion in the state's constitution filed a lawsuit against Ohio's ballot board yesterday. The group, Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights, brought the case to Ohio's Supreme Court, challenging the language the Republican-led board plans to use for the measure when it puts it to voters in November, and claiming that the changes are a, quote, deliberate attempt to mislead and sway voters. The group is asking that the full original ballot language that's already approved by Ohio's Attorney General be used in its place. The most impactful change made by the ballot board has to do with the framing of the limits of access and the exceptions to those limits. The original measure assured abortion access up until viability, after which it would be prohibited unless a doctor deems it medically necessary. Among the changes, the new ballot frames this as the ability to always access abortion at any stage of pregnancy, regardless of viability, if a doctor deems it medically necessary. NBC News' senior national political reporter Henry Gomez has the latest on this fight over abortion rights in Ohio. So, Henry, break down this lawsuit from the proponents of the ballot proposal. What are the legal complaints and how critical are these changes?
So, Ryan, the central complaint here is that the ballot language doesn't properly reflect the substance of the constitutional amendment. The measure's proponents are arguing that the ballot board's language is driven by the Republican Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, who is publicly and vehemently opposed to the measure, and that he has driven ballot language that is misleading and in cases confusing to a voter who might step into the booth this November to weigh in on the measure. You mentioned a little bit in the setup, words like fetal viability have been replaced with unborn child. There's absolute language like always allow an abortion when the actual text of the constitutional amendment employs more nuance when describing what could happen here. There's also more passive language with regard to how one can seek out medical treatment for themselves. And all of this, the proponents say, is an effort to muddy the waters and create confusion when a voter steps into the booth. And then the one last thing, you mentioned this as well, but the actual text of the constitutional amendment is only 194 words. It's actually shorter than what the ballot board is prescribing here. And so the proponents have argued, and they're asking the court to intervene, to just put that 194 word text onto the ballot, since it is the precise language that's at play here in November.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of it, right? Because the group had to gather signatures to place the measure on the ballot based on the language that they put together that was approved by Ohio's Attorney General. Could the group argue that by changing it, this isn't what the public agreed to?
That is part of the complaint, Ryan. It's not the central part of the complaint, but they do go into detail about how this was the language that was on the petitions that were circulated. This is the language that the Attorney General, Dave Yost, who, by the way, is a conservative Republican who is opposed to abortion, has already approved, and that by not allowing this language to go forth on the ballot or to allow this replacement language that muddies the waters would be a disservice to all of those previous efforts and decisions made.
And of course, the clock's ticking, right? The vote's approaching quickly. Is there a deadline for getting this all sorted out? And is it likely that this lawsuit's even going to be resolved before then?
So there's no deadline per se. There is an expedited track that this is on because we're within 90 days before the election. There's not been a hearing set as far as I know, but here's a date that you should keep in mind. September 22nd is when the ballots need to be ready for military and overseas voters. So if this isn't resolved by then, we're going to have an issue. But it is on an expedited track, and the expectation is that this will be dealt with by the Supreme Court well enough in advance of that September 22nd date I just mentioned.
And I wonder, just from your perspective covering this, is just the back and forth about this, could that have an impact, even if the original draft, the language is put into the actual vote? Is just the confusion over it something that could impact the ultimate outcome of this in November?
So if this is an off-year election and people headed to the polls in November are going to be bombarded with ads on both sides of this issue, and I suspect that those who do go to the polls in November are already going to be well educated about what a yes vote means and what a no vote means. One particular interesting thing in this complaint is that the proponents say they'll now have to spend more money to properly educate voters about what is in this. So that's one thing to watch.
Okay, terrific reporting. Henry Gomez, thank you so much for being on. We appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.